These are real solutions that the CBIA believes can really move the needle.
Yeah, and it's all directly from feedback from our members. One of the things that we ask all legislators to do is when they're reviewing any bill that's coming before the General Assembly this session is to think about how is this making Connecticut more affordable? I mean, these are the things that are going to drive our economy, and that's what we're concentrating on with our policy solutions at CBIA.
Welcome back to the CBIA BizCast powered by Google. I'm Amanda Marlowe. As we get into the 2025 legislative session, we wanted to take a look at some of the key issues and policies that'll impact Connecticut's business community. We are joined here today by the Vice President of Public Policy here at CBIA, Chris Davis. Chris, welcome to the BizCast.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
And you were on this BizCast, not with me, but 1 year ago. You've now been with CBIA a little over a year. Tell us, about what you've noticed about the business community, especially our advocacy members.
What's really impressed me, the level of engagement that our business community has, especially around public policy issues. I coming from the legislature myself, I was obviously interacting with CBIA regularly, interacting with businesses in my community, but to see how much it's happening across the entire state is really making an impact on how we do public policy here in the state of Connecticut. So I learned very quickly that there's so many businesses, so many employees of those businesses that are so engaged with these topics that really can make a difference for attracting the workforce, making a better business climate here in Connecticut, that it was just very impressed by the level of engagement that people had.
And besides spending a lot of time at the Capitol, you've also spent a lot of time this year out at a number of businesses.
Yeah, one of the key things that we do on our public policy team is getting out and meeting with members, meeting them in their businesses so that we can see firsthand exactly the impact that some of these public policy choices have on how they do business here in Connecticut. So it's important for us to be out meeting with businesses. So anytime a business wants to have us come out and tour, we're happy to do it. We oftentimes will bring a legislator with us and have them have the opportunity to see firsthand exactly how that business operates here in Connecticut. So it's important for us to be engaged on that level with each and every member of CBIA.
All right, so there you go. If you feel like you're not engaged enough, reach out to Chris. We'll get a legislator visit or even just a visit with some of the members of the public policy team scheduled.
Yes, it's important to get people out there to actually see firsthand how their policy choices are impacting the ability to employ people here in Connecticut and ability for businesses to grow, and most importantly, have the impact on their individual communities.
And, speaking of that business input, something the CBI has been doing now for the last couple of years is a campaign around policy solutions. This year, Reimagine Connecticut. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of building that and these solutions for 2025?
So we really started about a year ago in conversations with business leaders across the state about what they would like to see in the Reimagine Connecticut pledge. A lot of these happened during the forums that we had for our CBIA Foundation. We had over 30 forums in 2024 with business leaders and community leaders and nonprofit leaders across the state, really giving us impact or input, should I say, on what we're doing for our policies heading into the next legislative session. So we took that, mirrored it with what we put forth in the Opportunity Connecticut report that came out last fall, and then looked at what are some of these opportunities that we can do from that report to this legislative session in order to move the needle on growing our workforce, having a better business climate, and really improving the quality of life here in Connecticut.
And these are real solutions that the CBIA believes can really move the needle.
Yeah, and it's all directly from feedback from our members. These are items that they have said to us, if we can implement these changes, we can really start moving the needle here in Connecticut to grow our economy and improve our workforce.
And just a reminder for everyone who's listening or watching the Reimagine Connecticut, all of the pledge signers are on our website. We have all of the solutions listed on our website as well as your contact information. So businesses can really make sure that they're signed up and getting involved.
Yeah, and it's important that businesses can sign this pledge too and send a real message to legislators that we believe in these policy solutions and making them important for legislators to recognize that if we can implement these things, we can really grow our economy here in Connecticut.
We're going to get into some of those topics a little bit in just a minute, but I want to talk to you about some of the most important things that we're going to see this session, a lot of the biggest conversations that we're going to be having, but we're also starting to see, we just released our Reimagine campaign at our January Economic Summit. We've heard from the governor now about some of his priorities. We're seeing more from other other groups. What do you think are going to be the big talkers this session?
Well, this is a long session this year that just kicked off a couple of weeks ago. So we're going to be debating these issues all the way until June. And one of the items that I think is going to push us right up until that June deadline is probably going to be the state budget. Every 2 years, the legislature has to come up with a new state budget for Connecticut. And this happens to be one of them, where the fiscal guardrails and those fiscal controls that were put into place in 2017 that have really led to the massive surpluses that we've had over the last 6 years are really going to be challenged, because there's a lot of interest groups, state agencies, and others that became dependent upon that one-time federal funding, the ARPA funding that came in from the federal government during the pandemic. And now we have to decide as a state, are we going to continue with that funding at the state level? Are we going to have to make some tough decisions? Or are we going to be able to kind of expand the economy by making the right policy choices that reduce the costs and make Connecticut more affordable?
By this point, if you're engaged at all, you should probably know what fiscal guardrails means. But talk to me just about why they're so important, for what the impact that they have on the business community.
Well, as we saw in the decade that led up to 2017 during the Great Recession in 2008 and the real budget troubles that Connecticut had in the early 2010s, that spending, revenue, taxes, borrowing, we're all getting out of control here in Connecticut. So in 2017, when there was the bipartisan budget, followed up by the 2018 budget, there was these fiscal controls that were put into place, implementing the spending cap, revenue cap, bonding cap, which is really controls our borrowing. And then what's really going to be discussed this year, I think, is going to be the volatility cap, which deals with some of the volatile revenue that's coming into the state of Connecticut that can swing 20% one direction 1 year over the other. And that's really what got us into the trouble that we faced coming out of the Great Recession, was that volatility in those revenue sources. So this cap basically makes it so that we don't have to spend anything above that number. We can put it towards our savings, towards our pension program, to really drive down the costs for Connecticut's business owners and individuals.
And that really drives costs long term. So, there's concern now about how much funding can go to certain organizations, certain, parts of government right now, but it's really long term what you're thinking about.
Yeah, these guardrails are great in that they address two issues at the same time. They address the now, which is like what the budget's going to look like this year, but it also sets up a way for us to save money in the future that actually helps reduce those costs now and increase the spending that we can do today. So you have the opportunity, if we were to maintain the guardrails as they are now, to pay down those long-term costs, which then in turn lowers the amount of money that we have to spend today, which then opens up the opportunity to make those investments in workforce development, education, childcare, housing, the things that will really move Connecticut's economy forward.
And those things, are going to need to continue to move Connecticut's economy forward for many years to come.
Yeah, and that's why the guardrails are so important, because if we were to change them and allow the spending to go back to the way it was back in the 2010s, we would not be able to afford any of these programs in a very short amount of time, especially if the economy were to take a downturn, which is always possible given the run that we've had over the last several years. So it's important to maintain the guardrails so that we can have the predictability and stability that's needed for not just the business community, but for state government to be able to offer these types of programming in the future.
Now, in addition to the guardrails, what are some of the other, policy priorities, some of the biggest conversations that your team will be having this year?
Well, we heard from our membership through the surveys, through those forums, through our business meetings, going out and meeting with member businesses, that healthcare costs are very high for them right here in Connecticut. And that's not just here in Connecticut, but nationally as well. But we have the opportunity to really implement policies that can drive down those costs, especially for our small employers. Additionally, we hear that getting people back into the workforce is one of the biggest challenges that we have. 73,000 job openings in our workforce that's actually shrunk since the pandemic hit. So we need to have more affordable childcare and access to those childcare slots across Connecticut, something that our team is working very closely on a number of different interested parties. Housing is also a big issue. If we can attract the people to work here, they need somewhere to live. And we need to have housing policies that are kind of all included, from single family homes to multifamily housing to transit-oriented developments, all those kinds of things that can bring people into where these jobs exist and so that they can work and play and learn all in Connecticut.
Yeah, and some of these issues are things that are so important because they drive that workforce that these businesses need in order to continue to grow and succeed.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest issues that's holding back Connecticut right now is the inability to find people to work in the jobs that are open. So by having more affordable childcare, more access to housing opportunities, ability to have workforce training programs that can really help them into the pipeline, into these needed careers. I mean, these are the things that are going to drive our economy, and that's what we're concentrating on with our policy solutions at CBIA.
So as we mentioned before, a lot of these solutions in Reimagine Connecticut are about affordability, and especially when it comes to the fiscal guardrails, that's going to be super important. Can you talk a little bit more about why?
Well, one of the things that we ask all legislators to do is when they're reviewing any bill that's coming before the General Assembly this session is to think about how is this making Connecticut more affordable and how is it going to help us grow our economy? And the importance behind that is because we've been struggling for so many years for affordability. It's driven people out of the state. It's caused businesses to either close or relocate or expand in other states instead of expanding here in Connecticut. So if legislators were able to really sit back and think about, is this making Connecticut more affordable, and is it making easier to employ people here in Connecticut? I think you'll see a lot of good legislation get passed and a lot of the bad legislation get stopped.
And, in addition to that workforce affordability, one of the things that we've also heard year over year from businesses is the business friendliness of Connecticut. The cost of doing business for these companies is continuing to increase. What kind of policy solutions are related to that?
Well, we saw over last summer, the high cost of energy is really impacting Connecticut's businesses as well as its residents. So we're trying to pull together all the interested parties in a council or a commission looking at affordability and the ability for us to have a long-term strategy on how to lower those energy costs while also making the necessary investments in the grid in order for us to power the future of Connecticut's economy. So lowering those costs, lowering the costs of taxes here in the state of Connecticut, whether it be for small employers by restoring the pass-through entity tax credit to its original level, or doing research and development tax credits that are up to 100% so that we can compete with Massachusetts and New York and our neighboring states that have really invested into that research and development that can really grow the economy. Connecticut needs to stay competitive, and the best way that we can do that is by reforming our tax policy.
And it's not just standing out, on the East Coast. It's really being competitive with other states across the country.
Well, as the pandemic proved, that we're not just competing with our neighbors now, we're competing across the country, and we're also competing around the world for different industry, different jobs. The ability to work remotely has really kind of honed in on that. So now, we have to be taking our policy solutions in a broader scope. We have to be looking at it not just how it's going to impact us here in the region, but also across the country and across the globe.
A lot of these solutions really transcend party affiliations. We saw that, there was a large percentage of Democrats and Republicans who signed the Reimagine Connecticut pledge. It was really almost 50-50. So can you tell us a little bit, about some of that work and how we can bring these solutions?
Well, we really use that pledge and those pledge signers to help us build the coalition around passing some of these pieces of legislation as part of our policy solution. So we had 72 lawmakers, almost, as you mentioned, evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. Members of all four legislative caucuses from both the Senate and the House sign on to this. It's a way for us to really have those conversations across party lines about these real solutions that will really grow our economy and our workforce. Because at the end of the day, that's not a partisan issue. Trying to get your constituents more access to jobs and trying to help those businesses within their communities is something that transcends party. And we really work with legislators on both sides of the aisle in order to try to make that happen. And we work with other organizations, associations and unions and other groups in order to try to build those coalitions around a lot of these policy solutions.
Is there any things in the policy solutions this year that really come to mind when you think of coalitions and working together?
Yeah, a lot of the workforce development issues that we're talking about are really built around some of this coalition building that we've had, like the apprenticeship ratio changes that we're asking for has really come together with builders, with different unions, with different groups that are saying, hey, we need to bring young people into the trades as fast as possible. And one way that we can do that is through apprenticeship ratio changes. Additionally, we've been working with the teachers union and trying to change education reform so graduation requirements better reflect career readiness rather than necessarily teaching towards a test. And that's one thing that we can do working with teachers, with educators, with school systems in order to try to make our students ready to hit the ground running as soon as they graduate from high school.
Yeah, and these educational pipelines have become a real hot topic of conversation across the state, between the report that the Dalio Foundation came out with. We're seeing other reports about those students and really tapping into that talent.
Yeah, with those tens of thousands of jobs opening, we have over 100,000 young people that are graduating high school or nearing graduation and dropping out that could enter the workforce right away and help fill some of those gaps. Over 50% of those job openings do not require a college education. And so we can have these workforce pipeline development programs working with our affiliate ReimagineCT and others around the state to try to make sure that we can capture these young people when they're coming towards graduation and have them be able to enter the workforce right away.
There is a number of solutions. I know we've touched upon a few of them. Are there any others that you feel are really going to be driving conversation this session?
Well, I think housing continues to be a major issue for both employers and communities across the state. So one idea that we have at CBIA is a home buyer incentive program that would allow both the home buyer and the business to be able to contribute to an account so they can use that money with some tax benefits in order to make a down payment or improvements to a house that they buy here in Connecticut to try to spur that growth in our housing market, so that we can have more jobs here in Connecticut.
And that's something that we've been talking about for a couple sessions, those housing incentives.
Yeah, that bill in particular made it out of the banking committee last year unanimously, and we're looking forward to that bipartisan support again this year. And now when this greater conversation about a state budget and what tax reform looks like, I think we have the opportunity here to have this type of policy be implemented this session.
And there's a number of new lawmakers that'll be at the Capitol this session. How do you see, what kind of opportunity do you see there?
Yeah, there's 22 new lawmakers coming into the General Assembly this year. So an opportunity for us on the public policy team to be reaching out to them, connecting with them, understanding what's important to them, and ways that we can connect them with our member businesses in their communities, get them out there for those business tours, get them out there in those conversations. And that's why, the policy breakfast that we've already started this month, and that we're doing our Pints and Policy next month and having those conversations with business owners and trying to connect them with legislators across the state is a great way for these new legislators and existing legislators to have that connection and engagement with our members.
You have some new members on your team as well. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, we have two new members on the public policy team. We have Grace Brangwine, who's coming to us from some previous lobbying experience with the Connecticut Realtors Association and working on Governor Lamont's campaign and the campaign manager for Congressman Joe Courtney. So she brings a lot of experience, and she'll be working on not only just housing issues, but also looking at insurance issues for us as well. And then Jana Grasso has come over from one of the legislative caucuses and had previous lobbying experience as well. And she'll really be concentrating on childcare and workforce development issues for us here at CBIA.
Excited to have new members of your team.
Oh, it's always exciting, and they bring a ton of experience that's really going to help elevate our team heading into this legislative session.
And a lot of your team from last year has returned as well.
Yeah, we have a great existing team still here at CBIA. Pete Myers taking on some new roles, as well as Paul Amarone really stepping up and taking on labor and transportation and some of the other commerce-related issues that we have here. And then we have Paul Pescatello, who's been with us for a number of years, really concentrating on growing that bioscience sector here in Connecticut. So we're really excited about the team that we have here at CBIA and what we're going to be able to advocate for our business community.
When we think about this legislative session, because it's such a long session, I know you said the guardrails are going to be, we've been hearing about them well before session started. We're still hearing about them, and it's going to be down to the very beginning of June. But what can we kind of expect to see? When should businesses be looking to get more engaged, and what can we kind of expect?
Well, you usually see the public hearing process, which is where businesses can really get engaged, kicking off kind of in the beginning of February, coming through March, because that's really the bulk of when the committees will be meeting. So that's when we'll be sending out action alerts, requests for people to testify on bills or take part in different coalition building activities that we have to really get the message out there about the importance of certain issues, whether a bill is good or bad for the business community and more importantly for employing people here in the state.
It's so important to get that business involvement. That way it helps, kind of your team, but it really also helps paint a picture for the legislators.
Yeah, we are the voice of both employers here in Connecticut, but it's very important for them to step up and be engaged themselves in many instances. So hearing directly from your own constituent business can play such a huge role in your decision-making process as a legislator. And I know that from firsthand from meeting with different businesses when I served in the legislature, and the impact that can truly have on how you decide on how to vote on a bill. So, working with CBIA, finding out the opportunities to have those kinds of conversations with legislators is a great way for you to be engaged as a business owner or an executive here in Connecticut that can really help push the needle on growing our economy.
And we've heard some great things from these legislative breakfasts that we've had so far. As Chris mentioned, as you mentioned just a little while ago, we've got 2 Pints and Policy kind of happy hour networking events for, again, businesses to come meet your team. What other ways can businesses get involved?
Well, we have Business Day that's coming up in May as well, so make sure you mark your calendars for that. It's a great way to come in and hear from legislators directly and be able to meet with fellow business owners talking about public policy issues that are important to them. And then just pay attention to our calls for action. When we're out there asking for your input and your ability to testify in certain bills, that's one of the best ways that you can engage in this legislative process this year.
Is there anything else that you feel like businesses should know at this point in the session?
Well, I think it's just important to pay attention to what's out there, because just because a bill is introduced doesn't necessarily mean it's going to gain a lot of traction. Or on the converse side of that is that something could be waiting in the wings that we don't know about yet, that we may have to call on businesses to kind of come and testify very quickly and reach out to their legislators very quickly on. So, stay engaged, keep involved, and we'll keep you up to date throughout the rest of the legislative session.
All right. Well, we hope it's a great session. We'll catch you again in June.
Thanks.
And thank you for listening to this week's BizCast. You can listen, like, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a review and let us know if you have ideas for a future podcast. And for more episodes, head on over to CBIA.com.